Moonbound and Forsaken. Evan Corbin had always ignored the way the moon seemed to pull at her, the way the wind whispered secrets meant only for her. But on the night of the eclipse, the whispers became voices. The trees trembled. The stars vanished. And then he stepped from the shadows, golden-eyed and waiting. "You have been lost for too long," he murmured, tilting his head. "It's time to come home." Chapter 1. The Eclipse and the Enigmatic Stranger. The air in Willow Creek had always held a certain expectancy. Evan Corbin, at the weathered age of 58, felt it more keenly tonight than ever before. It wasn't just the impending lunar eclipse, a celestial event the town's small, eccentric population was buzzing about. It was something deeper, a thrumming in her very bones that resonated with the darkening sky. She stood on the porch of her small cottage, a mug of chamomile tea warming her hands, its familiar scent doing little to soothe the unusual restlessness that gripped her. Evan had lived a quiet life, a life of deliberate solitude after the accident that had claimed her husband, Thomas, 20 years prior. The grief had settled into a comfortable ache, a constant companion that had dulled the edges of her world. She'd filled the silence with her garden, her books, and the occasional friendly chat with Mrs. Gable from next door. Excitement was a distant memory, a youthful indulgence she'd long since abandoned. Yet tonight the silence was different. It wasn't empty, it was charged. The wind, usually a gentle caress through the willow trees that gave the town its name, whipped around her cottage with unusual ferocity. The leaves, already turning crimson and gold with the approaching autumn, swirled in a dizzying dance. Evan wrapped her worn, knitted shawl tighter around her shoulders, a shiver tracing its way down her spine that had nothing to do with the chill. As the moon began to slip behind the earth's shadow, the air grew thick, heavy with an almost palpable energy. The crickets, usually a constant chorus in the twilight hours, fell silent. Even the distant hoot of an owl seemed to hold its breath. Yvance's graying-brown hair, usually neatly braided, escaped its confines, whipping around her face, obscuring her vision for a moment. She brushed it back, her fingers brushing against the smooth, cool silver of the ring she always wore, a simple band with a single moonstone that had belonged to her grandmother. It felt unusually warm tonight. The world plunged into an eerie, coppery darkness. The stars, usually brilliant pinpricks in the vast expanse of the night sky, vanished completely. It was a darkness unlike any Evan had ever experienced, a darkness that seemed to press in on her, to suffocate her. Fear, a feeling she thought she'd conquered long ago, tightened its icy grip around her heart. Then she heard it. A whisper. Not the wind, not the rustling leaves. A voice. Low, resonant, and impossibly close. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She strained to hear, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Lost it breathed, the sound weaving through the unnatural stillness. So long Evan gripped the porch railing, her knuckles white. She wasn't alone. She knew it. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled, a primal instinct screaming at her to flee, to hide. But her feet felt rooted to the spot, her body heavy and unresponsive. A shape began to coalesce in the darkness at the edge of her garden, where the shadows of the ancient willow trees pooled like spilled ink. It moved with a fluid grace that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. As it drew closer, the faint, coppery light of the eclipsed moon illuminated the figure. He was tall, strikingly so, with shoulders broad enough to block out what little light remained. His hair was the color of raven's wings, falling in loose waves around a face that was both strikingly handsome and undeniably wild. But it was his eyes that held Evan captive. They glowed with an internal light, a golden, amber hue that seemed to pierce the darkness, to see straight through her. They were the eyes of a predator, yet, strangely, they held no malice. Only a deep, unsettling knowing. He stopped a few feet from the porch steps, his gaze unwavering. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the frantic beating of Yvance's heart. The scent of pine needles and something else, something musky and untamed, filled the air around him, making her head spin. Finally, he spoke, his voice the same low rumble that had whispered through the darkness. "You have been lost for too long," he murmured, tilting his head, a slight, almost curious gesture. His voice seemed to resonate deep within her chest, stirring something long dormant. "It's time to come home." Home? The word echoed strangely in Evan's mind. She hadn't felt at home anywhere since Thomas died. This place, this cottage, had been a refuge, a sanctuary from the pain of the world, but it had never truly felt like home. Confusion warred with the lingering fear. Who was this man? How did he know her? And what did he mean by home? She opened her mouth to speak, to demand answers, but her voice caught in her throat, trapped by the strange, compelling power that radiated from him. He took a step closer, his golden eyes searching hers. He seemed to be looking for something, some recognition, some spark of understanding. Evan felt a tremor run through her, a deep, instinctive response to his presence. It was more than fear, it was a connection. A pull. Something she couldn't explain, something that defied logic and reason. He extended a hand, his long fingers elegant and strong. The moonlight, or what little remained, glinted off a silver ring on his index finger, a ring that looked strikingly similar to her own, only his bore a wolf's head instead of a moonstone. "Come," he said, his voice a soft command, a gentle plea. Evan stared at his outstretched hand, her mind reeling. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to slam the door and lock it tight. But another, deeper instinct, one she hadn't felt in decades, urged her forward. It was the same instinct that had always drawn her to the moon, to the wild, untamed places of the world. It was a whisper of something ancient, something forgotten, something inevitable. Her hand, seemingly of its own volition, began to reach for his. She could turn back, but the pull she feels will change it all. Chapter 2. Whispers of a Forgotten Past. Her fingertips brushed his, and a jolt, like static electricity, but infinitely warmer, surged through Evan. She gasped, pulling her hand back as if burned, but the sensation wasn't painful. It was awakening. Like a long-dormant part of her soul had suddenly sprung to life. The world seemed to sharpen, the colors of the night, even in the eclipse's dim light, becoming more vibrant, more intense. The scent of pine and wolf intensified, filling her senses, making her dizzy. He didn't retract his hand, but his golden eyes softened, a flicker of what might have been understanding, or perhaps patience, crossing his features. He lowered his hand slightly, but kept his gaze locked on hers. "Don't be afraid," he said, his voice a low rumble that soothed the frayed edges of her fear. "I know this is a lot to take in, but I promise I won't hurt you." Evan swallowed, trying to regain some semblance of composure. She was a woman who had faced down grief, loneliness, and the relentless march of time. She wasn't easily frightened. Yet this man, this stranger, had managed to unsettle her to her very core in a matter of minutes. Who are you?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts. He smiled then, a slow, gradual curve of his lips that revealed a hint of sharp, white teeth. It was a smile that could charm birds from the trees, she thought fleetingly, and immediately chastised herself for the absurdity of the thought. "My name is Reese," he said. "And as for who I am, that's a longer story. One that's best told elsewhere." He glanced towards the woods that bordered her property, the darkness within them seeming to deepen, to beckon. "Elsewhere?" Evan repeated, her mind struggling to keep up. I don't understand." Reese stepped back, creating a sliver of space between them, a subtle acknowledgement of her unease. "You will," he said, his voice laced with a certainty that both intrigued and unnerved her. "But not here. Not now." He gestured again towards the woods. "Come with me, Evan. Just for a little while. I can explain everything." Everything. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken promises, with hidden truths. Evan's instincts screamed at her to refuse, to retreat back into the safety of her cottage, to lock the door and pretend this strange encounter had never happened. But the pull, that undeniable connection she'd felt when their fingers brushed, was still there, a warm hum beneath her skin. And there was something else. Curiosity. A deep, yearning curiosity that had been buried beneath layers of grief and routine for far too long. She looked at Rhys, at his compelling golden eyes, at the air of mystery that surrounded him, and knew she couldn't simply walk away. "Why me?" she asked, the question a whisper in the night. "Why night?" Rhys's gaze softened, a hint of sadness flickering in his eyes. "Because tonight is the night the veil is thinnest," he said. "The night when the past can reach out and touch the present. And because you are the key, Evan, the key to everything." The key. Another cryptic phrase. Evan felt a surge of frustration, a desire for clear, concise answers. But she also recognized the truth in his words, at least the part about the veil. She'd always felt it, that sense of something more, lurking just beyond the edges of her perception. Tonight, that sense was overwhelming, undeniable. She glanced back at her cottage, at the familiar, comforting glow of the lamp in the window. It represented safety, security, the life she knew. But it also represented stagnation, a life lived in the shadows of the past. Then she looked back at Rhys, at the wildness in his eyes, at the promise of answers, of something more. And she knew she couldn't stay. "All right," she said, the word a breath of surrender. "I'll go with you." But she hesitated. "But if I feel uncomfortable, if I want to leave, you have to promise to bring me back." Rhys nodded, his expression serious. "I swear it. On my honor." The word honor seemed to carry a weight, a significance that Evan couldn't quite grasp. He offered his hand again, and this time, Evan didn't hesitate. She placed her hand in his, her smaller, softer hand engulfed by his larger, calloused one. The warmth that surged through her this time was even more intense, spreading through her entire body, chasing away the lingering chill of the night. He led her towards the woods, his steps sure and silent. As they entered the shadow of the trees, the world around them seemed to shift, to change. The air grew cooler, the scent of pine and damp earth intensifying. The sounds of the town, faint as they were, faded away completely, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the snapping of twigs under their feet. Evan looked up at Rhys, her heart pounding in her chest. She had taken the first step into the unknown, into a world she hadn't even known existed. A world of whispers, of shadows, and of a man who claimed she was the key to everything. She only had one question: everything before or everything after? A new shiver, one not entirely unwelcome, ghosted its way up her spine. She was sure his touch, now a warm constant at her palm, was the only anchor she had left. Chapter 3. The Unveiling of Silver Creek. The woods were deeper, older than Evan remembered, even though she'd walked their edges countless times in her solitary rambles. The trees, mostly ancient oaks and towering pines, seemed to lean in, their branches intertwining overhead, creating a canopy that blotted out even the faint, coppery glow of the eclipsed moon. The darkness was almost complete, yet Rhys moved through it with an effortless grace, as if he could see in the dark. Evan, clinging to his hand, stumbled occasionally over roots and uneven ground, her senses overwhelmed by the unfamiliar sights and sounds. The air grew noticeably colder, and a mist began to rise from the ground, swirling around their feet like ethereal dancers. The scent of pine was now overlaid with the damp, earthy smell of moss and decaying leaves, and that underlying musky scent that clung to Rhys, a scent she was beginning to associate with him, with the wildness of this place. "How much further?" Evan asked, her voice a little breathless, partly from the exertion, partly from the growing sense of unease. She could feel Rhys's hand tighten slightly around hers, a reassuring pressure. "Not far," he replied, his voice low and soothing. "We're almost there." They continued to walk in silence for several more minutes, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig under their feet. Evan's eyes, slowly adjusting to the darkness, began to pick out more details, The intricate patterns of bark on the trees, the glint of moisture on leaves, the pale glow of phosphorescent fungi on a fallen log. Then, the trees began to thin, and Evan glimpsed a faint light ahead. They emerged from the woods into a clearing, and Evan gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Before them lay a scene that seemed to belong to another world, another time. A small village, nestled in a valley, bathed in the soft, silvery glow of what looked like moonlight. But the moon was still eclipsed, Evan was sure of it. Yet, here, it shone brightly, full and luminous, casting long, dancing shadows across the scene. The village, which she instinctively knew must be Silver Creek, was unlike anything she'd ever seen. The buildings were constructed of a pale, silvery stone that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. They were small, quaint, with steeply pitched roofs and intricately carved wooden balconies. Smoke curled from chimneys, carrying the scent of wood smoke and something else, something sweet and spicy, that made Evan's stomach rumble. But it was the people that truly captivated her. They were dressed in clothes that seemed to belong to another era long, flowing dresses for the women and breeches and tunics for the men. They moved with a grace and elegance that was almost otherworldly, their faces serene and beautiful. Some carried lanterns, which cast a warm, golden glow that contrasted with the silvery moonlight. Others gathered around a large bonfire in the center of the village, their laughter echoing through the clearing. What is this place?" Evan whispered, her voice filled with awe and disbelief. Rhys smiled, his golden eyes reflecting the moonlight. "This," he said, "is Silver Creek, your ancestral home." Evan stared at him, her mind reeling. Ancestral home? She had no family, no connections to any place other than Willow Creek. Her parents had died when she was young, and she'd been raised by her grandmother, who had never mentioned anything about a place like this.
"But I don't understand," she said.
"My grandmother never." Rhys's smile faded, replaced by a look of understanding. "Your grandmother did what she thought was best," he said. "She protected you, kept you hidden." "Hidden? From what?" Rhys hesitated, his gaze shifting to the village, to the people who were now beginning to notice their presence. "From those who would harm you," he said quietly. "From those who fear what you are, what she was." Evan's confusion deepened. She was just Evan Corbin, a widow, a gardener, a woman who lived a quiet, unremarkable life. What could anyone possibly fear about her? As they approached the village, the people stopped their activities and turned to watch them. Their expressions were curious, but not unfriendly. Some smiled, others nodded in greeting. Evan felt a strange sense of belonging, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a very long time. An older woman, with silver hair braided down her back and eyes that shone with the same golden light as Rhys's, stepped forward. She wore a long, flowing dress of deep blue and a silver necklace with a wolf's head pendant, identical to the one on Rhys's ring. "Rhys," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "You have returned, and you have brought her." Rhys nodded. "Mother," he said, "this is Evan Corbin." "Mother?" Evan's eyes widened. This woman was Rhys's mother? But she looked ageless, her skin smooth and unlined, her eyes full of a youthful vitality. The woman smiled at Evan, her gaze kind and knowing. "Welcome, Evan," she said. "We have been waiting for you." Waiting for her? The words echoed in Evan's mind, adding another layer to the mystery. She felt a wave of dizziness, her head spinning with the sheer impossibility of it all. She had stepped into a world that defied logic, a world of moonlight and magic, of ancient secrets and hidden identities. And somehow, she was at the center of it all. The sense only intensified as the woman, Rhys's mother, reached out to her, palm up. Would Evan ever find her way back to the world she knew? Chapter 4. Echoes of a Lost Lineage. Evan hesitated, her hand hovering over the woman's outstretched palm. The warmth radiating from Rhys's mother, Lyra, was palpable, a comforting beacon in the surreal landscape of Silver Creek. It was a warmth that mirrored the strange, electric connection she felt with Rhys, but with a maternal, nurturing undertone. Lyra's smile remained gentle, patient. "Don't be afraid, child," she said, her voice a soothing balm to Avant's frayed nerves. "You're safe here. You're home." Home. The word, spoken again, resonated deep within Avant's soul, stirring a longing she hadn't realized she possessed. She looked at Lyra's eyes, so like Rhys's, yet filled with a wisdom and a depth of experience that spoke of centuries, not decades. And she knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that she was, in some inexplicable way, connected to this place, to these people. She placed her hand in Lyra's, and a wave of warmth, stronger than before, surged through her. It was a comforting, enveloping warmth, like being wrapped in a soft, familiar blanket. Lyra's grip was firm, reassuring. "Come," Lyra said, gently drawing Evan towards the village. "There is much to tell you." Rhys walked beside them, his presence a silent, protective force. Evan glanced at him, catching his eye. He offered her a small, encouraging smile, and for a moment, the fear and confusion that had been swirling within her subsided, replaced by a tentative sense of trust. They walked through the village, the curious gazes of the residents following them. Evan noticed that many of them had the same golden eyes as Rhys and Lyra, a striking feature that set them apart from the people of Willow Creek. She also noticed the subtle, almost imperceptible way they moved, a fluid grace that hinted at something more than human. Lyra led them to a large, imposing building at the edge of the village, constructed of the same shimmering, silvery stone as the other houses, but grander, more ornate. It had a wide, welcoming porch, with intricately carved wooden pillars and a large, arched doorway. "This is the ancestral hall," Lyra explained, gesturing towards the building. "It has been the home of our family for generations." As they entered the hall, Evan gasped. The interior was even more breathtaking than the exterior. The walls were adorned with intricate tapestries depicting scenes of wolves, forests, and moonlit landscapes. The ceiling was high and vaulted, with exposed wooden beams that were carved with intricate designs. A large fireplace dominated one end of the hall, a fire crackling merrily within, casting a warm, golden glow over the room. Lyra led them to a group of comfortable chairs arranged around the fireplace. She gestured for Evan to sit, and Evan sank gratefully into the soft cushions, feeling the tension slowly begin to ease from her body. Rhys sat beside her, his presence a reassuring anchor. Lyra sat opposite them, her gaze serious, but kind. "Evan," she began, "I know this is a lot to take in. You have been kept in the dark for your own protection, but the time has come for you to learn the truth about who you are and where you come from." She paused, taking a deep breath. "We are not like the people of Willow Creek. We are different. We are werewolves." The word hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. Werewolves. Evan stared at Lyra, her mind struggling to process the information. It was a word from fairy tales, from horror stories. It couldn't possibly be real. Yet, she looked at Lyra, at her golden eyes, at the undeniable air of otherness that surrounded her. She looked at Rhys, at the wildness in his gaze, at the musky scent that clung to him, the scent of wolf. And she knew, deep down, that it was true. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You will," Lyra said gently. "For centuries, our family, the Moonshadow clan, has lived here in Silver Creek, hidden from the outside world. We are bound to the moon, to its cycles, to its power. We can shift forms, taking the shape of wolves at will." She paused, letting the information sink in. "Your grandmother, Alara, was a powerful member of our clan. She was my sister. When hunters discovered our existence and threatened to destroy us, she made a difficult choice. She took you as a baby and fled to the human world, to Willow Creek, hoping to keep you safe, to give you a normal life. Avant's mind was a whirlwind. Her grandmother a werewolf? Her own lineage hidden for so long? The ring, always on her finger a symbol, not just a trinket. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "But why me?" Evan asked. "Why am I so important?" Lyra smiled, a sad, knowing smile. You, Evan, are the last of the direct moon shadow line. You possess a power, a connection to the moon, that is stronger than any we have seen in generations. You are the key to our survival, to our future. The responsibility in Lyra's tone sent chills to places deep within Evan, places she wasn't even familiar with. She could feel the weight of these unknown ancestors, these moon-bound people, falling on her shoulders. This couldn't be real. Could it? Chapter 5. The Scent of Pine and Wolf. The weight of Lyra's words settled upon Evan like a physical burden. The last of the moonshadow line. A power she didn't understand, a responsibility she hadn't asked for. It was all too much, too fast. She felt a wave of dizziness, a desperate need to escape, to return to the familiar simplicity of her life in Willow Creek. But the scent of pine and wolf, the scent of Reese, was a grounding presence, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this bewildering new reality. She glanced at him, his golden eyes watching her with a mixture of concern and something else. Something deeper, more intense. I don't know if I can do this, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I'm just Evan. I'm not a savior. Reese reached out, his hand hovering over hers, not quite touching, but close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from his skin. You are more than you know, Evan, he said, his voice low and reassuring. You are strong, resilient. You have survived loss. Loneliness, you have a spirit that shines brighter than you realize. His words, spoken with such quiet conviction, were like a lifeline, pulling her back from the brink of panic. She looked into his eyes, and for a moment, she saw not just the wolf, but the man beneath. A man who understood loss, who carried his own burdens, his own secrets. Lyra, watching them, smiled softly. Reese is right, she said. You are not alone, Evan. We will help you. We will teach you. We will protect you. She gestured towards a steaming mug that had been placed on a small table beside Evan's chair. Drink this, she said. It's a special blend of herbs. It will help you adjust. Evan hesitated, then picked up the mug. The aroma was unfamiliar, a blend of earthy and sweet, with a hint of something wild and untamed. It reminded her, strangely, of the scent of the woods, of the scent of Reese. She took a tentative sip. The liquid was warm and soothing, spreading a comforting warmth through her body. She felt her muscles relax, her mind begin to clear. The overwhelming sense of panic began to subside, replaced by a growing curiosity, a tentative acceptance of the impossible reality that had been thrust upon her. What happens now? She asked, looking from Lyra to Reese. Lyra leaned forward, her expression serious. Now, you begin your training, she said. You need to learn about our ways, about your powers, about the dangers that threaten us. Training. The word conjured images of rigorous physical exercises, of mystical rituals, of things she couldn't even begin to imagine. Evan felt a flicker of fear, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of excitement. A part of her, the part that had always been drawn to the wild, to the unknown, was eager to explore this new world, to discover the secrets that had been hidden from her for so long. Reese stood up, his movements fluid and graceful. I'll show you around, he said, offering Evan his hand. Let you get acquainted with Silver Creek. Evan hesitated for only a moment before taking his hand. The familiar warmth surged through her, a comforting connection in this strange, new environment. She stood up, feeling a little steadier than before, the herbal tea having worked its magic. As they walked out of the ancestral hall and into the moonlit village, Evan felt a sense of wonder wash over her. The silvery stone buildings, the graceful movements of the people, the scent of wood smoke and spices, it was all so different, so magical, yet strangely familiar, as if she had dreamed of this place before. Reese pointed out various landmarks, the training grounds, where young werewolves learned to control their shifts, the communal kitchens, where meals were prepared and shared, the healing center, where ancient remedies were used to treat injuries and illnesses. As they walked, Reese began to tell her more about the Moonshadow clan, about their history, their traditions, their beliefs. He spoke of their deep connection to the moon, of the rituals they performed to honor its cycles, of the power it granted them. He also spoke of the challenges they faced, of the constant threat of discovery, of the hunters who sought to destroy them. He spoke of the importance of secrecy, of the need to protect their way of life. Evan listened intently, her mind absorbing the information, trying to make sense of it all. She was beginning to understand the weight of the responsibility that rested upon her shoulders, the importance of her role in the survival of her people. As they reached the edge of the village, where the woods began again, Rhys stopped and turned to face her. The moonlight illuminated his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the intensity of his golden eyes. "There's something you should see," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek for a moment longer than necessary. The touch sent a shiver through Evan, a spark of something that went beyond mere comfort, beyond mere connection. It was desire, a feeling she hadn't experienced in decades, a feeling she thought she'd buried along with her husband. He turned and began to walk towards the woods, and Evan, her heart pounding in her chest, followed. She wasn't sure what awaited, but she knew, deep down, there was no turning back. This new life, this scent of home, was her fate now. Chapter 6. A bond forged in moonlight. Rhys led her along a narrow, winding path, deeper into the woods than she had ventured earlier. The trees were even taller here, their branches forming a dense canopy overhead, blocking out most of the moonlight. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and that ever-present musky scent of wolf that clung to Rhys, a scent that was becoming increasingly intoxicating. Evan felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. Fear of the unknown, of the power that was awakening within her, of the dangers that Rhys had spoken of. But anticipation, too, a growing excitement about discovering this new world, about exploring her own hidden potential, about Rhys. She couldn't deny the attraction she felt for him, an attraction that was both physical and emotional. It was the way he looked at her, with a mixture of intensity and tenderness, the way he spoke to her, with a quiet respect and understanding, the way he moved, with a fluid grace that was both mesmerizing and primal. He stopped at the edge of a small clearing, bathed in a shaft of moonlight that had managed to penetrate the dense canopy. In the center of the clearing was a pool of water, its surface still and reflective, like a mirror. "This is the moon pool," Rhys said, his voice a low murmur. "It's a sacred place for our clan, a place of power, of transformation." Evan looked at the pool, mesmerized by its beauty. The moonlight reflected on its surface, creating an ethereal glow. She could feel a subtle energy emanating from it, a thrumming vibration that resonated deep within her. Rhys stepped closer to the pool, his gaze fixed on its surface. "The moon," he said, "is our source of strength, our connection to the wild, to our true selves. It is through the moon that we shift, that we embrace our wolf form." He turned to face Evan, his golden eyes shining in the moonlight. "Tonight," he said, "I will show you." Evan's heart skipped a beat. She knew what he meant. He was going to shift. He was going to transform into a wolf, right before her eyes. Fear warred with fascination, but the latter won out. She had come this far. She had accepted this new reality. She couldn't shy away now. "I'm ready," she said, her voice trembling slightly, but firm. Rhys smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent a shiver down her spine. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment, as if gathering his strength, centering himself. Then it began. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that was both terrifying and beautiful. His body began to tremble, his muscles rippling beneath his skin. His bones shifted, his limbs elongated, his hands and feet transforming into powerful paws. Fur, the color of midnight, sprouted from his skin, covering his body in a thick, luxurious coat. Evan watched, transfixed, unable to tear her eyes away. The transformation was both brutal and graceful, a testament to the raw power of nature, of the ancient magic that flowed through his veins. Within moments, the man was gone, replaced by a magnificent wolf. He was larger than any wolf Evan had ever seen, his fur dark and glossy, his eyes glowing with an even more intense golden light. He stood there, proud and powerful, a creature of the wild, of the moon. He lowered his head, looking at Evan, his eyes no longer predatory, but gentle. He whined softly, a sound that was both a greeting and a reassurance. Evan felt a tear roll down her cheek. It was beautiful. Terrifying, yes, but also incredibly beautiful. She felt a connection to this creature, to this wolf, that went beyond anything she had ever experienced. It was a primal connection, a soul connection. She reached out a trembling hand, and the wolf stepped forward, nuzzling his head against her palm. His fur was soft and warm, and she could feel the powerful muscles beneath, the steady beat of his heart. He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with an intelligence, an understanding that transcended words. She felt a sense of peace, of belonging, that she hadn't felt in decades. In that moment, under the silvery light of the moon, a bond was forged. A bond between a woman and a wolf, a bond between two souls, a bond that would forever change their lives. It was a bond of trust, of understanding, of love. A love that was both ancient and new, a love that was both terrifying and exhilarating. The wolf shifted his weight, his form flickering in the shadows, a low, rumbling noise coming again from his chest. How long would this bond, newly created, last? Chapter 7. The Curse of the Crimson Moon. The wolf, Rhys, remained close to Evan, his presence a comforting warmth in the cool night air. He nudged her hand again, as if urging her to follow, and then turned and began to walk back towards the village, his movements fluid and silent. Evan, still reeling from the sheer wonder of his transformation, followed, her hand resting lightly on his broad back, feeling the powerful muscles ripple beneath his soft fur. As they walked, she couldn't help but steal glances at him, at the magnificent creature he had become. The fear she had felt earlier had dissipated, replaced by a sense of awe, of connection. She felt drawn to him, to this wolf form, in a way she couldn't explain, a way that went beyond logic, beyond reason. When they reached the edge of the village, Rhys stopped and looked back at her, his golden eyes questioning. He whined softly, then nudged her hand again, a clear indication that he wanted her to wait. He then loped towards the ancestral hall, disappearing inside. Evan waited, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked around the village, at the quiet, sleeping houses, at the silvery glow of the moon, and felt a sense of unreality, as if she were still dreaming. A few minutes later, Rhys emerged from the hall, once again in his human form. He was dressed in the same clothes he had been wearing earlier, his dark hair tousled, his golden eyes still glowing with a hint of the wolf within. He smiled at her, a reassuring smile that eased the lingering tension in her shoulders. "I needed to let my mother know we were back," he said, his voice a low murmur, "and that you were all right." Evan nodded, understanding. She could only imagine Lyra's concern, her worry about her son, and the woman he had brought into their hidden world. She wants to talk to you," Rhys said, his gaze shifting towards the hall. "About the Crimson Moon." The Crimson Moon. The word sent a shiver down Evan's spine. It was a phrase Lyra had mentioned earlier, a phrase that had been laden with a sense of foreboding, of danger. What is the Crimson Moon?" Evan asked, her voice hesitant. Rhys hesitated, his expression serious.
"It's a rare lunar event," he said.
"A time when the moon appears red, bathed in an unnatural light. It's a time of heightened power, but also of great danger for our kind." He paused, taking a deep breath. "There's an ancient curse associated with the Crimson Moon," he continued. "A curse that has plagued our clan for centuries." He explained that the curse, laid upon their ancestors by a powerful sorceress who had been wronged by a Moonshadow Alpha, caused werewolves to lose control during the Crimson Moon, to become consumed by their primal instincts, to turn savage and unpredictable. "The curse has weakened over time," he said, "but it still poses a threat, especially to those who are new to their powers." Evan felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach. New to her powers. That was her, wasn't it? She was the newcomer, the one who hadn't yet learned to control her abilities, the one who was most vulnerable to the curse. "And when is the next crimson moon?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Rhys's gaze met hers, his expression grim. "In 3 weeks," he said. "That's why your training is so crucial, Evanna. You need to learn to control your powers, to resist the pull of the curse before it's too late." 3 weeks. It wasn't much time. Evanna felt a surge of panic, a desperate need to learn, to prepare, to protect herself and to protect Rhys. She had seen the gentle side of his wolf form, but she also knew the power, the potential for savagery, that lurked beneath. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice firm. "I won't let the curse control me." Rhys smiled, a small, encouraging smile. "I know you won't," he said. "You are stronger than you think, Evanna. And you're not alone." He then turned and extended his hand to her, inviting her back into the hall. This new, heavy knowledge was a weight. Would 3 weeks be enough? Chapter 8. Shadows of Doubt and Desire. Evanna took Rhys's hand, the familiar warmth a small comfort against the chilling dread that the knowledge of the crimson moon had instilled. As they walked back into the ancestral hall, she felt a growing sense of unease, a shadow of doubt that gnawed at the edges of her resolve. Lyra was waiting for them by the fireplace, her expression serious, but her eyes filled with a warmth that reassured Evanna. She gestured for them to sit, and they settled into the chairs, the crackling fire providing a welcome counterpoint to the chill that had settled in Avant's bones. "Evanna," Lyra began, her voice gentle but firm, "Rhys has told you about the crimson moon, about the curse that threatens us." Evanna nodded, her gaze fixed on Lyra's face. "The curse," Lyra continued, "is not just a matter of losing control. It amplifies our darkest instincts, our deepest fears, our hidden desires." She paused, her gaze shifting to Rhys, a flicker of something, perhaps warning, perhaps concern, crossing her features. "It can be especially dangerous for those who are bonded," she said, the word bonded carrying a weight, a significance that Evanna couldn't quite grasp. Evanna looked at Rhys, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Bonded?" she repeated. What does that mean?" Rhys shifted uncomfortably, his gaze avoiding hers. It was Lyra who answered. "Werewolves," she explained, "are capable of forming deep, emotional bonds with others. Bonds that go beyond friendship, beyond ordinary love." She paused, looking directly at Evanna. "These bonds can be incredibly powerful, incredibly fulfilling. But they can also be dangerous, especially during the crimson moon. The amplified emotions, the heightened instincts can make the bond volatile, unpredictable." Evanna felt a shiver run down her spine. She thought of the connection she had felt with Rhys, both in his human and wolf form, the undeniable pull, the desire. Was that a bond? Was that what Lyra was warning her about? "Rhys and I," she began, her voice hesitant. "We felt something, in the woods, when he shifted." Lyra nodded, her expression knowing. "Yes," she said. "The beginnings of a bond. It's natural, given your connection, your shared lineage. But it's also something you need to be careful with, especially now." Evanna looked at Rhys, her heart pounding in her chest. He was still avoiding her gaze, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. She felt a surge of confusion, of hurt. Was he regretting the connection they had formed? Was he afraid of it? What should we do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "For now," Lyra said, "you need to focus on your training. You need to learn to control your powers, to resist the pull of the curse. And you need to understand the nature of the bond, the risks, and the rewards." She paused, her gaze softening. "I know this is a lot to ask, Evan," she said. "But you are strong, resilient. You have the blood of the moon shadows in your veins. You can do this." Lyra's words, meant to be encouraging, only served to deepen Avant's unease. The weight of responsibility, the threat of the curse, the uncertainty of her bond with Rhys, it was all overwhelming. As Lyra continued to speak, explaining the intricacies of werewolf lore, of the training Evanna would undergo, Evan found her gaze drifting back to Rhys. He was listening intently to his mother, but his body language was tense, closed off. She longed to reach out to him, to bridge the distance that had suddenly opened up between them, but she didn't know how. The seed of doubt, planted by Lyra's warning, had taken root, growing into a thorny vine of uncertainty and fear. Could she trust her feelings for Rhys? Could she trust him? Or was the bond, the desire, simply a dangerous illusion, a product of the curse of the approaching crimson moon? Only time and the fast-approaching crimson threat would tell. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm of Hunters. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Advanced training began in earnest, a rigorous regimen designed to awaken her dormant powers, to prepare her for the looming threat of the crimson moon. Lyra was her primary teacher, guiding her through ancient rituals, teaching her the history of the Moonshadow clan, explaining the intricacies of werewolf physiology. Evan learned about the different phases of the moon and their influence on werewolf abilities. She learned about the herbs and plants that could enhance or suppress their powers. She learned about the importance of control, of channeling her emotions, of resisting the primal urges that threatened to overwhelm her. But the most challenging part of her training was the physical aspect. Rhys took on the role of her instructor in this area, pushing her to her limits, forcing her to confront her fears, to embrace the wolf within. They spent hours in the training grounds, a large, open area just outside the village. Rhys would shift into his wolf form, and Evan would practice controlling her own transformation, striving to match his speed, his agility, his strength. It was grueling, exhausting work. Evan's body ached, her muscles screamed in protest, but she refused to give up. She knew that her survival, and the survival of the clan, depended on her mastering these skills. But the training wasn't just about physical prowess. It was also about emotional control. Rhys constantly challenged her, provoked her, trying to push her to the breaking point, to force her to confront the darkness that lurked within. "You need to learn to control your anger, Evan," he said one afternoon, his voice sharp, his golden eyes intense. "The curse will feed on your negative emotions, amplify them, use them against you." Evan, exhausted and frustrated, snapped back. "It's easy for you to say," she retorted. "You've been doing this your whole life." "I'm just starting." Rhys's expression softened, a flicker of understanding crossing his features. He stepped closer, his voice gentler. "I know it's hard," he said. "But I also know you can do it. You have a strength within you, Evan, a fire that burns bright. You just need to learn to control it, to channel it." His words, spoken with such conviction, eased the tension in her shoulders. She looked into his eyes, and for a moment, she saw not just the instructor, but the man, the wolf, who had awakened something deep within her. But the shadows of doubt, of the warnings about the bond, still lingered. She couldn't deny the attraction she felt for him, the pull that drew her to him, but she also couldn't shake the fear that it was all a dangerous illusion, a product of the curse. As the days passed, the tension in Silver Creek grew. The crimson moon was approaching, and with it, the threat of the hunters. Lyra had explained that the hunters were a secret organization, dedicated to eradicating werewolves, believing them to be monsters, abominations. "They have been our enemies for centuries," she said, her voice grim. "They are ruthless, relentless. And they know about the crimson moon. They will use it to their advantage." The villagers began to prepare for the worst, strengthening their defenses, stockpiling supplies, preparing for a potential attack. The air was thick with anticipation, with fear. One evening, as Evan and Rhys were walking back from the training grounds, they heard a commotion near the edge of the village. They rushed towards the sound, their hearts pounding in their chests. They found a group of villagers gathered around a young werewolf, who was injured, his arm bleeding profusely. "Hunters," he gasped, his voice weak. They attacked us in the woods." Lyra arrived, her expression grim. She examined the young werewolf's injuries, her face pale. "They're getting closer," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They're testing our defenses." The attack was a stark reminder of the danger that lurked just beyond the borders of Silver Creek. It was a sign that the storm was gathering, that the crimson moon would bring not only the threat of the curse, but also the threat of the hunters. The fight, it seemed, had already begun. Chapter 10. Secrets in the Ancestral Home. The attack on the young werewolf cast a pall over Silver Creek. Fear, already a constant companion, intensified, mingling with the ever-present anticipation of the approaching crimson moon. Evan found herself increasingly drawn to the ancestral hall, seeking solace in its ancient walls, in the echoes of her ancestors that seemed to linger in the air. One evening, after a particularly grueling training session with Reese, Evan found herself alone in the hall's library. It was a vast, circular room, lined with shelves filled with ancient tomes, leather-bound journals, and scrolls yellowed with age. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust, a comforting aroma that reminded her of her grandmother's attic, a place she had loved as a child. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books, her gaze drawn to the intricate carvings on the wooden shelves. She felt a connection to this place, to the history it held, to the secrets it guarded. She pulled a book from the shelf, a thick, leather-bound volume with a silver clasp. The title, embossed in faded gold letters, read, The Chronicles of Moonshadow. She opened the book, her fingers tracing the delicate script of the ancient text. It was a history of the Moonshadow clan, written by generations of werewolves, detailing their triumphs, their tragedies, their struggles against the curse and the hunters. As she read, she began to uncover details that Lyra and Reese had only hinted at. She learned about the origins of the curse, about the sorceress who had laid it upon them, about the specific rituals that had been used to try to break it. She also learned more about her own lineage, about her grandmother, Alara, and her decision to flee Silver Creek, to protect Evan from the dangers of their world. She read about Alara's struggles, her sacrifices, her unwavering love for her granddaughter. Tears welled up in Evan's eyes as she read, a mixture of grief for the life she had never known and gratitude for the grandmother who had given up everything to keep her safe. As she continued to read, she stumbled upon a passage that made her heart skip a beat. It described a hidden chamber within the ancestral hall, a secret room where powerful artifacts were kept, artifacts that could potentially help break the curse. The passage described the location of the chamber, a hidden door behind a tapestry in the main hall, a door that could only be opened with a specific key, a key that had been lost for generations. Evan's mind raced. Could this be true? Could there be a way to break the curse, a way to protect themselves from the crimson moon? She closed the book, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to find this chamber. She had to find the key. She searched the main hall, her eyes scanning the tapestries that adorned the walls. She found the one described in the book, a large, intricate tapestry depicting a scene of wolves hunting under a full moon. She carefully examined the tapestry, running her fingers along its edges, searching for any sign of a hidden door. She found it a small, almost invisible seam in the fabric, outlining the shape of a doorway. Now she needed the key. She remembered the moonstone ring she always wore, the one that had belonged to her grandmother. Could it be? It was a long shot, but she had to try. She removed the ring, her fingers trembling. She examined the moonstone, noticing for the first time a tiny, almost imperceptible inscription on the inside of the band, an inscription that looked like a wolf's paw. She pressed the moonstone against the seam in the tapestry, aligning the wolf's paw inscription with a similar, barely visible marking on the wall. She heard a click, a soft, mechanical sound. The tapestry shifted slightly, revealing a small, dark opening in the wall. Evan had found the hidden chamber. The hairs on the back of her neck were standing, but she didn't pause. She slipped through the opening, feeling along the wall, both cautious and determined. The darkness beyond would be either salvation or her demise. Chapter 11. The Dance of Forbidden Love. The hidden chamber was small and circular, the air thick with dust and the scent of something ancient, something magical. A single shaft of moonlight, filtering through a small, high window, illuminated the room, revealing its contents. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, upon which rested a silver box, intricately carved with images of wolves and moons. Around the pedestal were shelves filled with various artifacts, ancient weapons, jeweled amulets, leather-bound books, and strange, glowing crystals. Evan's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the place described in the chronicles, the place where powerful artifacts were kept, artifacts that could potentially help break the curse. She approached the pedestal, her gaze fixed on the silver box. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and lifted the lid. Inside the box, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a necklace. It was made of silver, with a large, crimson-colored stone pendant, shaped like a wolf's head. The stone pulsed with a faint, inner light, a light that seemed to resonate with the approaching crimson moon. Evan recognized it immediately. It was the Moonshadow Amulet, a legendary artifact said to possess the power to amplify a werewolf's abilities to control the effects of the crimson moon. She carefully lifted the necklace from the box, her fingers brushing against the cool silver, the warm, pulsing stone. She felt a surge of energy, a connection to the amulet, a sense of power. But as she held the amulet, she also felt a sense of unease. The crimson stone seemed to pulsate with a dark energy, a seductive energy that both attracted and repelled her. She remembered Lyra's warning about the crimson moon, about how it amplified emotions, how it could make bonds volatile, unpredictable. She thought of Rhys, of the undeniable attraction she felt for him, of the shadows of doubt that still lingered. Suddenly, she heard a noise behind her. She turned, her heart leaping into her throat, and saw Rhys standing in the doorway, his golden eyes wide with surprise. "Evan," he said, his voice a low murmur. What are you doing here?" Evan hesitated, unsure of what to say. She hadn't told anyone about her discovery, about her search for the hidden chamber. I found this," she said, holding up the amulet. "In the chronicles. It had said to be able to control the effects of the crimson moon." Rhys stepped into the chamber, his gaze fixed on the amulet. He reached out, his fingers brushing against hers as he took the necklace from her hand. He examined the amulet, his expression serious. "The Moonshadow Amulet," he said. "It's been lost for generations." He looked at Evan, his golden eyes searching hers. "How did you find this place?" he asked. Evan explained about the passage in the chronicles, about the hidden door, about her grandmother's ring. Rhys listened intently, his gaze never leaving hers. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "You are full of surprises, Evan the Corbin," he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. He handed the amulet back to her.
"It belongs to you," he said.
"You are the last of the Moonshadow line. It's your right, your responsibility." Evan took the amulet, her fingers closing around the cool silver, the warm, pulsing stone. She felt the weight of its power, the weight of her lineage, the weight of the approaching crimson moon. Rhys stepped closer, his gaze intense. "But be careful, Evan," he said, his voice low and earnest. "The amulet is powerful, but it's also dangerous. It can amplify your emotions, your desires." His words echoed Lyra's warning, stirring the shadows of doubt within her. She looked at him, at the undeniable attraction in his eyes, at the wildness that lurked beneath the surface, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. He reached out, his hand gently brushing against her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through her, a spark of desire that ignited a fire within her. "Evan he whispered, his voice husky with emotion. He hesitated, his gaze searching hers, as if struggling with some inner conflict. The air between them crackled with tension, with unspoken feelings, with the forbidden nature of their attraction. He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, a soft, tentative kiss that sent a wave of heat through her body. Evan closed her eyes, surrendering to the moment, to the undeniable pull that drew her to him. The kiss deepened, becoming more passionate, more urgent. Evan's arms wrapped around his neck, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. She felt his body pressed against hers, the hard muscles of his chest, the warmth of his skin. This new, forbidden dance was going to bring them to an embrace, but would they find themselves burned by the passion or uplifted? Chapter 12. A glimpse of the wolf within. The kiss went on, a tempest of suppressed longing and undeniable attraction, fueled by the proximity of the crimson moon and the charged energy of the amulet. Evelyn felt herself losing control, swept away by a tide of emotions she had kept buried for far too long. But just as she was about to completely surrender, a flicker of doubt, a whisper of warning, intruded. She remembered Lyra's words about the volatility of bonds during the crimson moon, about the amplified emotions, the heightened instincts. She pulled back, breathless, her heart pounding in her chest. Rhys looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of desire and confusion. "Rhys," she said, her voice trembling. We can't.
Not now.
Not with the crimson moon so close." He hesitated, his gaze searching hers. He seemed to be struggling with his own inner demons, with the conflicting urges of his wolf nature and his human reason. "You're right," he said finally, his voice husky with regret. He stepped back, creating a sliver of space between them, a subtle acknowledgement of the need for restraint. The tension between them remained, thick and palpable, but the immediate urgency had subsided. Evelyn felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. She couldn't deny the desire she felt for Rhys, but she also knew that giving into it now, under the influence of the crimson moon, could be disastrous. "We need to focus," she said, her voice firmer now. "On the curse, on the hunters. We can't let our feelings distract us." Rhys nodded, his expression serious. "You're right," he said again. "We have a responsibility. To our clan, to ourselves." He turned his attention back to the amulet, examining it more closely. "This could be our best chance," he said, "to control the effects of the crimson moon. But we need to understand how it works, how to use it safely." Evelyn agreed. They spent the next few hours in the hidden chamber, studying the amulet, poring over the ancient texts, trying to decipher the secrets of its power. They discovered that the amulet was not only capable of amplifying a werewolf's abilities, but also of suppressing the negative effects of the crimson moon, of helping them maintain control, of resisting the urge to become savage. But they also discovered that using the amulet came with a price. It required a significant amount of energy, a draining of one's own life force. And it required a strong will, a clear mind, a mastery of one's emotions. As they were leaving the chamber, Rhys turned to Evelyn. "There's something else you should know," he said, his voice low. "Something that happens during the crimson moon to some werewolves." He hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers. "Sometimes," he continued, "a werewolf will experience a vision. A glimpse of their soulmate." Evance's heart skipped a beat. Soulmate. The word echoed in her mind, stirring a mixture of hope and fear. "And have you experienced this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Rhys met her gaze, his golden eyes filled with a depth of emotion she couldn't quite decipher. "Yes," he said. "Once. A long time ago." He didn't elaborate, and Evelyn didn't press him. But she couldn't help but wonder who had he seen? Was it someone from his past? Or was it her? The question lingered in the air between them, unspoken, unanswered. As they emerged from the hidden chamber and into the main hall, Evelyn felt a renewed sense of determination. She would master the amulet, she would control her powers, she would resist the curse. And she would face whatever visions the crimson moon might bring, whatever truths it might reveal. She would do it for her clan, for herself. And, she admitted silently, for him. The wolf was just a glimpse, but what she saw, she would always hold dear. What would this vision show them? Chapter 13. The Price of Protection. The final days leading up to the crimson moon were filled with a frantic energy. The villagers of Silver Creek prepared for the worst, reinforcing their defenses, stockpiling supplies, and practicing their combat skills. The threat of the hunters loomed large, adding another layer of danger to the already volatile situation. Evelyn focused on mastering the Moonshadow amulet, spending hours in the hidden chamber, practicing channeling its power, learning to control its effects. Rhys was her constant companion, guiding her, supporting her, pushing her to her limits. The bond between them continued to deepen, despite their efforts to maintain a distance. The attraction was undeniable, a magnetic pull that drew them together, a force that was both exhilarating and terrifying. They found themselves stealing glances, sharing brief touches, their conversations laced with unspoken feelings. One afternoon, as they were practicing with the amulet, Evan felt a surge of power, stronger than anything she had experienced before. The crimson stone pulsed with a vibrant light, and she felt a rush of energy flow through her body, sharpening her senses, enhancing her strength. But with the power came a wave of darkness. She felt her anger, her fear, her desire, amplified, intensified, threatening to overwhelm her. She struggled to maintain control, to resist the pull of the curse. Rhys, sensing her struggle, stepped forward, his hand reaching out to her. Evan, he said, his voice urgent.
Focus. Breathe.
Control it. His touch, the familiar warmth of his hand, was a grounding presence, a lifeline that pulled her back from the brink. She closed her eyes, focusing on his voice, on his touch, on the bond that connected them. Slowly, gradually, she regained control. The surge of power subsided. The darkness receded. She opened her eyes, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Rhys looked at her, his golden eyes filled with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked. Evan nodded, her body trembling. I think so," she said. But it was close. Too close. She realized then the true price of the amulet's power. It amplified everything, not just her abilities, but also her emotions, her vulnerabilities. It was a dangerous tool, one that could easily be misused, one that could consume her if she wasn't careful. That evening, as the crimson moon began to rise, casting an eerie, reddish glow over Silver Creek, Lyra gathered the villagers in the ancestral hall. She spoke of the challenges they faced, of the curse, of the hunters, of the need for courage, for unity, for strength. "Tonight," she said, her voice firm, "we will face our fears. We will protect our home. We will survive." She then turned to Evan, her gaze serious. "Evan," she said, "you are the key. You hold the power of the Moonshadow amulet. You are our best hope." Evan felt the weight of responsibility settle upon her shoulders, a heavy burden that she knew she had to bear. She looked at Rhys, at his unwavering gaze, at the silent support he offered, and she felt a surge of determination. She would not fail. She would protect her clan. She would protect Rhys. She would protect the home she had finally found. As the crimson moon reached its zenith, bathing the village in its unnatural light, Evan felt the change begin. The familiar tingling sensation, the shifting of bones, the sprouting of fur. She closed her eyes, embracing the transformation, channeling the power of the amulet, striving to maintain control. The amulet was getting warmer. She focused as they had practiced. She would maintain control. She opened her eyes, her vision now sharper, her senses heightened. She was a wolf, powerful and graceful, her fur the color of midnight, her eyes glowing with a crimson light, reflecting the moon above. But unlike the other times, this transformation felt different. She was in control mostly. The amulet helped. But what was the cost? Chapter 14. Betrayal and Broken Trust. The crimson moon hung heavy in the sky, casting an eerie, blood-red glow over Silver Creek. Evan, in her wolf form, felt the power of the amulet coursing through her veins, a wild, untamed energy that both exhilarated and terrified her. She was in control, yes, but it was a fragile control, a constant battle against the primal urges that the curse amplified. She stood beside Rhys, also in his wolf form, his dark fur shimmering in the crimson light. They were positioned at the edge of the village, guarding the main entrance, their senses heightened, alert for any sign of danger. The other villagers, also transformed, were stationed throughout Silver Creek, their growls and howls echoing through the night, a chorus of defiance against the looming threat. The air was thick with tension, with anticipation, with fear. The crimson moon was known to bring out the worst in werewolves, to make them unpredictable, savage. And the hunters, they knew, would be waiting, ready to exploit their weakness. Suddenly, a howl pierced the night, a howl that was different from the others, a howl filled with pain, with terror. It came from the western edge of the village, where a small group of younger werewolves were stationed. Rhys and Evan exchanged a look, their eyes filled with alarm. They raced towards the sound, their paws pounding against the ground, their hearts racing in their chests. They arrived at the scene to find chaos. Several of the younger werewolves were injured, their fur matted with blood. And standing amidst them, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light, was Gareth. Gareth was one of the elders of the clan, a respected member of the community, a werewolf who had always seemed trustworthy. But now, his face was contorted in a snarl, his fangs bared, his claws extended. He was clearly under the influence of the curse, lost to his primal instincts. "Gareth!" Rhys howled, his voice filled with disbelief.
Stop this. Control yourself.
But Gareth didn't respond. He lunged at one of the injured werewolves, his claws raking across its flesh. Rhys reacted instantly, tackling Gareth, knocking him to the ground. The two wolves wrestled fiercely, their growls and snarls echoing through the night. Evan, her heart pounding in her chest, watched in horror. She knew that Rhys was strong, but Gareth was older, more experienced. And under the influence of the Crimson Moon, he was incredibly dangerous. She wanted to help, but she knew that interfering could make things worse. She had to trust Rhys, to trust that he could handle the situation. But then she saw it. A glint of silver, flashing in the crimson moonlight. Gareth had a knife, a silver knife, hidden in his fur. He was about to stab Rhys. Evan reacted without thinking. She lunged at Gareth, her jaws clamping down on his arm, forcing him to drop the knife. Gareth roared in pain and fury, turning his attention to Evan. He was stronger than she was, and under the influence of the curse, he was utterly ruthless. He threw her off him, sending her crashing to the ground. He stood over her, his eyes glowing with a savage light, his fangs bared. Evan braced herself for the attack, knowing that she was no match for him in this state. But then a figure intervened. Lyra, in her wolf form, leaped between them, shielding Evan from Gareth's wrath. Lyra and Gareth fought fiercely, their bodies a blur of fur and claws. Lyra was skilled, experienced, but Gareth's madness gave him an unnatural strength. Evan, struggling to her feet, watched in horror as Gareth managed to pin Lyra to the ground, his jaws closing around her throat. Evan knew she had to act, and fast. She focused all her energy, all her will, channeling the power of the Moonshadow amulet. She felt a surge of power, stronger than anything she had experienced before, a power that threatened to consume her. She saw, then, not the amulet's power, but a blinding flash of red. This betrayal cut deeper than anything she could have imagined. How could this happen? Here, Chapter 15. The Heart's Unyielding Path. The crimson light intensified, blurring Avant's vision, amplifying the sounds of the struggle, the snarls, the growls, the desperate gasps. She felt herself losing control, the power of the amulet, fueled by the crimson moon, threatening to overwhelm her. But she couldn't give in. She had to save Lyra. She had to stop Gareth. She focused on the bond she shared with Rhys, on the love she felt for him, for his mother, for the clan. She used that love as an anchor, a grounding force against the raging storm within. With a roar, she launched herself at Gareth, channeling all her remaining energy into the attack. She knocked him off Lyra, sending him sprawling across the ground. Gareth, momentarily stunned, scrambled to his feet, his eyes burning with a furious, insane light. He lunged at Evan, his claws extended, his fangs bared. But Evan was ready. She met his attack head-on, her own claws and fangs finding their mark. They fought fiercely, their bodies a blur of motion, their growls and snarls echoing through the night. Evan, fueled by adrenaline and the power of the amulet, fought with a strength she didn't know she possessed. She was faster, more agile, more powerful than she had ever been before. But Gareth was still stronger, and his madness gave him an edge. He managed to land a blow, his claws raking across Avant's side, drawing blood. Evan staggered, pain searing through her body. She felt herself weakening, the power of the amulet beginning to fade. She knew she couldn't hold on much longer. But then she saw Reese. He had managed to subdue the other younger werewolves who had succumbed to the curse, and now he was racing towards them, his eyes filled with a fierce determination. He launched himself at Gareth, tackling him from behind, knocking him away from Evan. The two wolves wrestled fiercely, their bodies locked in a brutal struggle. Evan, using the opportunity, struggled to her feet. She saw Lyra, lying injured on the ground, her breathing shallow. Evan rushed to Lyra's side, her heart filled with dread. She examined Lyra's injuries, her paws trembling. The wounds were deep, serious. "Lyra," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Hold on. Please hold on." Lyra opened her eyes, her gaze weak, but filled with a knowing. "Evan, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The amulet used it to heal. Evan remembered then the healing properties of the amulet, the knowledge they had gleaned from the ancient texts. She placed her paw on the crimson stone, focusing all her remaining energy, all her will, channeling the power of the amulet into Lyra's wounds. She felt a surge of warmth, a tingling sensation, as the amulet's power flowed through her into Lyra. She saw the wounds begin to close, the bleeding slow, Lyra's breathing become easier. But the effort was draining Evan, weakening her further. She felt herself slipping, losing consciousness, the crimson light fading to black. The last thing she saw was Reese, standing over Gareth's defeated form, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and something else. Something that looked like love. She collapsed to the ground, her body limp, her mind drifting into darkness. The pain was receding. The sounds were fading. She focused, one last time, on her hope, her love for Reese. Would she ever wake to see him again? Chapter 16. Scars of the Past, Hope for the Future. Evan awoke to the scent of herbs and the gentle warmth of a fire. She was lying on a soft bed in the healing center, her body aching, her side bandaged. She slowly opened her eyes, blinking against the soft light. Reese was sitting beside her, his hand resting gently on hers. His eyes, no longer glowing with the crimson light of the wolf, were filled with concern, with relief, with love. "Evan," he said, his voice a soft murmur. "You're awake." Evan tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through her side, forcing her to lie back down. What happened?" she asked, her voice weak. Reese explained that she had used the amulet to heal Lyra, saving her life, but at a great cost to herself. She had fallen unconscious, and they had brought her to the healing center, where she had been for the past 2 days. "Lyra, is she all right?" Evan asked, her voice filled with concern. Reese nodded. "She's recovering," he said. "Thanks to you." He then told her about Gareth. He had been subdued, and the elders were deciding his fate. The hunters had not attacked, perhaps deterred by the chaos within the village, or perhaps waiting for another opportunity. The crimson moon had passed, and with it, the immediate threat of the curse. But the scars remained, both physical and emotional. Evan felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her, a deep weariness that went beyond physical pain. She had faced her fears, she had fought for her clan, she had saved Lyra's life. But she had also seen the darkness that lurked within, the potential for savagery, the fragility of control. Reese, sensing her emotions, tightened his grip on her hand. "You were amazing, Evan," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You were brave, strong, you saved us all." Evan looked at him, at his kind eyes, at the genuine love and respect she saw there, and she felt a flicker of hope, a spark of warmth in the darkness. "We did it together," she said, her voice stronger now. "We faced it together." Reese smiled, a small, tender smile that reached his eyes. "Yes," he said. "We did." Over the next few days, Evan slowly recovered. She spent her time resting, talking with Reese, and visiting Lyra, who was also on the mend. The bond between Evan and Reese had deepened, strengthened by the shared experience, by the mutual respect and admiration, by the undeniable love that had blossomed between them. They spoke openly about their feelings, about the challenges they had faced, about the fears that still lingered. They acknowledged the risks, the dangers, but they also acknowledged the undeniable connection, the pull that drew them together. One evening, as they were sitting by the fireplace in the ancestral hall, Rhys took Avant's hand, his gaze serious. "Evan," he said, "I know we've been through a lot, and I know there are still challenges ahead. But I can't deny my feelings for you any longer. I love you." Avant's heart skipped a beat. She looked into his eyes, and she saw the truth, the sincerity, the depth of his emotion. "I love you too, Rhys," she said, her voice filled with emotion. He leaned in and kissed her, a soft, tender kiss that sealed their bond, a kiss that promised a future filled with challenges, yes, but also with love, with hope, with the promise of a life together. The scars of the past remained, a reminder of the darkness they had faced, but they also served as a testament to their strength, their resilience, their ability to overcome adversity. And with the love they shared, they knew they could face anything, together. The future was still uncertain, but one thing felt true. The path forward was one they would always take hand in hand. What would this new future hold for them? Chapter 17. The Ritual of Reclaiming. With the crimson moon behind them and their love declared, Evan and Rhys turned their attention to the future, to the challenges that still lay ahead. The threat of the hunters remained, and the elders of Silver Creek were determined to find a way to neutralize them, to secure a lasting peace for their clan. Lyra, recovered from her injuries, revealed that the ancient text spoke of a ritual of reclaiming that could potentially strip the hunters of their power, of their ability to track and harm werewolves. The ritual, however, was complex and dangerous, requiring the combined power of the Moonshadow Amulet and the participation of all the adult members of the clan. It also required a specific location, a place of ancient power, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. The location was identified as a hidden clearing deep within the woods, a place known as the Whispering Stones. It was a place where the Moonshadow clan had performed rituals for centuries, a place where the spirits of their ancestors were said to linger. Preparations for the ritual began immediately. The villagers gathered supplies, practiced their chants, and prepared themselves mentally and spiritually for the challenging task ahead. Evan, as the wielder of the Moonshadow Amulet, would be at the center of the ritual, channeling its power, guiding the energy of the clan. She felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation, a sense of responsibility for the success of the ritual, for the future of her people. Rhys was her constant support, her anchor, helping her prepare, reassuring her, sharing his knowledge and experience. Their love had blossomed into a deep, unwavering bond, a source of strength and comfort in the face of uncertainty. On the eve of the ritual, Evan and Rhys found themselves alone in the ancestral hall, standing before the fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Are you nervous?" Rhys asked, his voice soft, his hand gently caressing her arm. Evan nodded. "A little," she admitted. "It's a big responsibility." Rhys smiled, a tender smile that reached his eyes. "You are more than capable, Evan," he said. "You have the strength, the courage, the power. And you have me. Always." Evan leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Rhys," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "And I love you." "Evan," he replied, his voice husky with emotion. He kissed her then, a long, passionate kiss that sealed their bond, a kiss that spoke of love, of hope, of a future together. The next day, the entire clan gathered at the Whispering Stones. The clearing was bathed in the soft light of the setting sun, the ancient stones casting long, eerie shadows. The air was thick with anticipation, with a sense of magic. Evan, wearing the Moonshadow Amulet, stood in the center of the clearing, surrounded by the other werewolves. Lyra, as the eldest member of the clan, led the chanting, her voice strong and resonant. The ritual began. The werewolves chanted in unison, their voices rising and falling in a rhythmic cadence, their energy flowing towards towards the amulet. Evan felt the power surge through her, a wild, untamed energy that threatened to overwhelm her. But she focused on Rhys, on his unwavering gaze, on the love that connected them, and she managed to maintain control. She raised the amulet, channeling its power, directing it towards the whispering stones. The stones began to glow, emitting a faint, ethereal light. The air crackled with energy, and a sense of something else, something ancient, something powerful, filled the clearing. The ritual continued for hours, the chanting growing more intense, the energy building, the veil between worlds thinning. Evan felt herself being drawn into another realm, a realm of spirits, of ancestors of power. Suddenly, a vision appeared before her, a vision of the hunters, their faces contorted in anger, in fear, their power fading. The vision faded, and Evan felt the energy subside, the chanting cease. The whispering stones returned to their normal state, the air growing still. The ritual was complete. Whether it had been a complete success, they would have to discover. The energy spent had been immense, but Evan could feel this was a new beginning. What exactly did that vision mean? Chapter 18. Confronting the Ancient Enemy. The days following the ritual of reclaiming were filled with a cautious optimism. The werewolves of Silver Creek felt a shift in the energy around them, a sense of freedom, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. But they also knew that the threat of the hunters was not entirely gone, that they needed to remain vigilant, to be prepared for any potential attack. Evan and Rhys, their bond stronger than ever, continued to train, to hone their skills, to prepare for whatever the future might hold. They also spent time researching the hunters, trying to understand their origins, their motivations, their weaknesses. They discovered that the hunters were an ancient organization, dating back centuries, their hatred of werewolves rooted in fear, in superstition, in a twisted belief that they were protecting humanity from a monstrous threat. They also discovered that the hunters were not a monolithic entity, that they were divided into different factions, each with its own leadership, its own agenda. The faction that had been targeting Silver Creek was known as the Crimson Fawn, a particularly ruthless and fanatical group. One evening, as Evan and Rhys were studying ancient texts in the Ancestral Hall's library, they stumbled upon a passage that described a hidden fortress, a stronghold where the Crimson Fawn leaders were said to reside. The passage described the location of the fortress, a remote, mountainous region far from Silver Creek. It also described a secret entrance, a hidden passage that could be used to infiltrate the fortress. Evan and Rhys exchanged a look. This could be their chance, their opportunity to strike a decisive blow against the hunters, to end their threat once and for all. They presented their findings to Lyra and the other elders, who, after much deliberation, agreed to a daring plan. A small group of werewolves, led by Evan and Rhys, would infiltrate the fortress, confront the Crimson Fawn leaders, and, if possible, capture or eliminate them. The plan was risky, dangerous, but they knew it was their best chance to secure a lasting peace for their clan. They prepared meticulously, gathering supplies, studying maps, practicing their combat skills. The night before their departure, Evan and Rhys found themselves alone in the hidden chamber, standing before the pedestal where the Moonshadow amulet rested. Evan reached out, her fingers brushing against the cool silver, the warm, pulsing stone. She felt the power of the amulet, the connection to her ancestors, the weight of responsibility. Rhys placed his hand over hers, his gaze meeting hers. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice soft. Evan nodded. "Yes," she said. "We'll do this together." He leaned in and kissed her, a long, passionate kiss that sealed their bond, a kiss that spoke of love, of courage, of hope. The next morning, they set off, a small group of 6 werewolves, including Evan, Rhys, and 4 of the clan's most skilled warriors. They traveled for days, through dense forests, across rugged mountains, their senses heightened, alert for any sign of danger. Finally, they reached the location described in the ancient texts, a towering cliff face, shrouded in mist. They found the secret entrance, a narrow crevice hidden behind a waterfall, and they slipped inside, entering the darkness of the hunters' fortress. They moved stealthily through the labyrinthine corridors, their paws silent on the stone floors, their senses alert for any sign of guards. They knew that they were walking into the heart of the enemy's territory, that one wrong step could mean their death. But they were determined, driven by their love for their clan, by their desire for peace, by their unwavering belief in their cause. The confrontation was inevitable. They were ready, or so they believed. What awaited within the fortress's depths. Chapter 19. A love worth fighting for. The interior of the fortress was a maze of cold, damp corridors, lit by flickering torches that cast eerie shadows on the stone walls. The air was heavy with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic, something that smelled like blood. Evan, Reese, and their small band of werewolves moved with a practiced stealth, their senses heightened, alert for any sign of danger. They knew that the hunters were ruthless, well-trained, and that they would be outnumbered. As they navigated the labyrinthine passages, they encountered several patrols of guards, armed with crossbows and silver-tipped weapons. They managed to dispatch them silently, using their superior speed and agility, their claws and fangs proving deadly effective. But they knew that the alarm would eventually be raised, that they couldn't remain undetected forever. They needed to find the Crimson Fawn leaders quickly, before they were overwhelmed. They followed the directions gleaned from the ancient texts, moving deeper and deeper into the fortress, towards what they believed to be the central chamber, where the leaders were likely to reside. Finally, they reached a large, imposing door, guarded by two heavily armed hunters. They knew that this was it, the final confrontation. They prepared for battle, their hearts pounding in their chests, their muscles tense. Evan felt the power of the Moonshadow amulet coursing through her veins, a wild, untamed energy that both exhilarated and terrified her. Reese, his golden eyes glowing in the dim light, nodded to her, a silent signal that he was ready. They launched their attack, a coordinated assault that took the guards by surprise. Reese, in his wolf form, tackled one of the guards, his powerful jaws closing around his throat. Evan, also in her wolf form, lunged at the other guard, her claws raking across his chest. The guards fought back fiercely, but they were no match for the werewolves' speed and ferocity. Within moments, both guards lay dead on the floor. Evan and Reese exchanged a look, a brief moment of shared relief and determination. Then, they turned their attention to the door. Reese, shifting back to his human form, examined the door. It was made of thick, reinforced wood, with a heavy iron lock. "We'll have to force it," he said, his voice low. He stepped back, and with a powerful kick, he smashed the door open, splintering the wood and breaking the lock. They entered the chamber, their weapons drawn, their senses alert. The chamber was large and circular, lit by a large chandelier that hung from the ceiling. In the center of the room stood a long table, surrounded by several figures, dressed in dark robes. These were the Crimson Fawn leaders, the architects of the hunters' campaign of terror against the werewolves. They looked up, startled by the intrusion, their faces contorted in anger and surprise. "You," one of the leaders snarled, his hand reaching for a weapon. "How did you get in here?" Reese stepped forward, his voice cold and menacing. "We're here to end this," he said. "To end your reign of terror." The leaders laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "You think you can defeat us?" One of them sneered. "You are outnumbered, outmatched." But Evan and Reese were not intimidated. They had come too far, sacrificed too much, to back down now. Evan stepped forward, holding up the Moonshadow amulet, its crimson stone pulsing with a vibrant light. "We have the power of our ancestors on our side," she said, her voice strong and clear. "We will not be defeated." The battle began. The werewolves and the hunters clashed in a fierce, brutal struggle, the chamber echoing with the sounds of growls, snarls, and the clang of weapons. Evan and Reese fought side by side, their movements coordinated, their bond strengthening their resolve. They were a force to be reckoned with, their combined power overwhelming the hunters. One by one, with the aid of the 4 other werewolves of their team, the leaders fell. The final leader, an ancient, grizzled man with eyes that burned with hatred, lunged at Evan, a silver dagger in his hand. Rhys, seeing the danger, reacted instantly, intercepting the attack, shielding Evan with his body. The dagger plunged into his shoulder, a cry of pain escaping his lips. Evan, seeing Rhys injured, screamed in rage. She channeled all her remaining energy, all her love for Rhys, into the Moonshadow amulet. A blinding light erupted from the stone, engulfing the chamber, throwing the final hunter back against the wall. He was defeated, but at what price? Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts. The blinding light faded, leaving Evan standing amidst the fallen bodies of the Crimson Fang leaders. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked around the chamber, at the devastation they had wrought, at the price of their victory. Her gaze fell upon Rhys, lying on the floor, his hand clutching his wounded shoulder, his face pale. She rushed to his side, her heart filled with dread. "Rhys," she cried, her voice choked with emotion. "Are you all right?" He opened his eyes, his gaze weak, but filled with a love that transcended the pain. "Evan, he whispered, his voice raspy.
I'm fine."
But Evan knew he wasn't fine. The silver dagger had pierced his shoulder, and silver was poison to werewolves, weakening them, preventing them from healing. She tore a strip of cloth from her dress and pressed it against the wound, trying to stem the flow of blood. "We need to get you back to Silver Creek," she said, her voice trembling. "To the healing center." Rhys tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness washed over him, forcing him to lie back down. I don't know if I can make it," he whispered. Evan felt a surge of panic, a desperate fear that she was about to lose him, the man she loved, the wolf who had captured her heart. She remembered the Moonshadow amulet, its healing properties, the power it possessed. She had used it to heal Lyra, but at a great cost to herself. Could she use it again? Could she risk her own life to save Rhys?
She didn't hesitate.
She placed her hand on the amulet, focusing all her energy, all her will, all her love for Rhys, channeling the power of the stone into his wound. She felt a surge of warmth, a tingling sensation, as the amulet's power flowed through her into Rhys. She saw the wound begin to close, the bleeding slow, the color return to his face. But the effort was draining her, weakening her further. She felt herself slipping, losing consciousness, the world around her fading to black. She fought to stay awake, to hold on, to make sure Rhys was safe. She focused on his face, on his eyes, on the love that connected them, a love that was stronger than any curse, any weapon, any darkness. Finally, she saw his eyes open, clear and bright, the pain replaced by relief, by love. "Evan, he said, his voice stronger now.
You saved me."
Evan smiled, a weak, trembling smile. "We saved each other," she whispered. Then, she collapsed, her body limp, her mind drifting into darkness. She awoke again in the healing center, lying on the same soft bed, Rhys sitting beside her, his hand holding hers. His shoulder was bandaged, but he looked healthy, strong. "You're awake," he said, his voice filled with relief. "How do you feel?" Evan smiled.
"Tired," she said.
"But alive." Rhys leaned in and kissed her, a soft, tender kiss that spoke of love, of gratitude, of a future together. They had won. They had defeated the Crimson Fang. They had secured a lasting peace for their clan. They had overcome the curse, the darkness, the fear. And they had done it together, their love their greatest weapon, their bond their strongest shield. The final confrontation had not been with the hunters, but with their own fears, their own doubts, their own vulnerabilities. And they had emerged victorious, their love stronger, their bond unbreakable. The future, though uncertain, was filled with possibilities that they would discover together. Epilogue. The years that followed were a time of peace and prosperity for Silver Creek. The threat of the hunters was gone. The Crimson Fong, a distant memory. The werewolves, no longer forced to live in hiding, began to cautiously interact with the outside world, sharing their knowledge, their skills, their wisdom. Evanna and Reese, their love deepened by the trials they had faced, became the leaders of their clan, guiding them with wisdom, compassion, and strength. They rebuilt Silver Creek, making it a haven for werewolves and a beacon of hope for the future. Evanna, embracing her heritage, became a powerful and respected figure, her connection to the Moonshadow Amulet, a source of strength and inspiration. She taught the younger generation about their history, their traditions, their powers, ensuring that the legacy of the Moonshadow clan would endure. Reese, his wound fully healed, remained her constant companion, her partner, her love. He stood by her side, supporting her, advising her, sharing her burdens and her joys. Their bond, forged in moonlight and tested by fire, was unbreakable, a testament to the power of love, of trust, of forgiveness. They often returned to the moon pool, the place where their journey had begun, the place where Reese had first shifted before her, the place where their bond had been forged. They would stand there, hand in hand, under the silvery light of the moon, remembering the challenges they had faced, the sacrifices they had made, the love that had sustained them. One evening, as they were standing by the moon pool, Evanna felt a familiar tingling sensation, a shifting of bones, a sprouting of fur. She looked at Reese, her eyes wide with surprise. I'm shifting," she said, her voice filled with wonder. Reese smiled, his golden eyes shining in the moonlight. "It's time," he said. Evanna closed her eyes, embracing the transformation, feeling the power of the moon, the power of her heritage, flowing through her veins. She became a wolf, a magnificent creature of the night, her fur the color of midnight, her eyes glowing with a silvery light. She and Reese, two wolves, ran through the woods, their paws silent on the soft earth, their hearts filled with joy, with freedom, with love. They were home, they were together, and they were free. The moon, their constant companion, shone brightly above them, casting its silvery light upon their path, guiding them, protecting them, blessing them. And as they ran, they howled, a chorus of joy, of triumph, of a love that had conquered all. Their song echoed through the trees, a testament to their enduring bond, a promise of a future filled with hope, with peace, and with the unwavering magic of the moon. The echoes carried on the wind, a soft reminder that love will, indeed, find a way.